Are you trying to upgrade your PlayStation audio? Or maybe you want better TV audio? Hey guys, it's Nick from Nick's Listening Space. Today's discussion is going to be about the Aiyima T8. So this is a really interesting device because its claim to fame is that you're getting an all-in-one device that includes a DAC, RCA pass-through, headphone output, as well as a tube. Now, at the time of filming this, you can pick this up on Amazon for around $89. I purchased this back on Amazon Prime Day, and since then, I've actually seen this guy go on sale for as low as $59. So for $60, you get this full-featured device. Now the question is, how well does it sound? The DAC on board in this guy is an ESS Sabre DAC. Typically what you're going to find with the ESS Sabre DAC is probably something that's going to lean a little bit more clinical. Unlike some of the other DACs that I've reviewed, which are 32-bit, this guy is only 24-bit. My initial listening impressions of this guy, I streamed Tidal from my Blue Sound into this via USB. And I walked away from that initial listening experience thinking that this DAC was rather constrained, or it felt a little closed off. I wasn't quite getting this big immersive experience. And I think along with that, there isn't this sense of imaging or depth that I'm finding on, say, my Fosi Audio ZD3 or my topping DAC. And so, at that moment in time, I was really on the fence about this guy, and I almost wasn't going to make a video. I put this guy down for about a week, and I came back, and this time I wanted to try out the RCA inputs. I think that because of my initial listening impressions with the DAC, I felt as though that because of its closed-off nature, or rather, this isn't a DAC that's going to add a lot of space into the instrumentation of your mix. I think that rather, there is this closed-off sound here. Where I think that type of sound signature may have an advantage is with certain types of recordings. Out of curiosity, when I started listening to this guy as a preamplifier device, I wanted to see how it performed with my turntable. And I'm pleased to say that I think the RCA inputs are, as a pass-through device or as a preamplifier, I think this is where this guy is going to shine. And for the purposes of this review, I'll talk about a bunch of albums that I listen to. And, there's this question I ask often, but it's like, when does lo-fi suddenly become better than hi-fi? And I can give you a couple genres out there, musical genres like vaporwave, or even more like gritty lo-fi music that you might listen to. Some of that music might just perform better, I think, on a low-end device. I mean, that's a theory I have, or a thought that I have, right? And I've talked about this many times on this channel or with these other products, but, oftentimes if you get a device that is too revealing, it can create a less enjoyable experience. Granted, if you have a great recording, then that product will reveal how beautiful that recording is. I'm a huge hip-hop fan, and listening to that music years and years ago, I was listening to that music on really crappy equipment or really basic $100 headphones, and probably didn't have a DAC, listening to it on my iPod or whatever. And there's a lot of mixes or albums that I listened to years ago that when I listen to them today, on a hi-fi system, the sound is changed so much from rather what I remember. I think sometimes with hip-hop, where you're getting intimate vocals that are sort of just sung directly into your ears, that's not really necessarily music with a lot of instrumentation or a mix that maybe warrants a depth in the mix, or whatever I'm trying to say. Which I think what I'm trying to say is that some music does not have a sense of space on it. And with a lot of hip hop, I think that that's the case. settling into this guy, I started listening to a whole slew of hip-hop albums one night, and I got really into it. And there's a couple things that I think this device can do that are really fun. And so one of those things is this guy has an onboard EQ. And with the remote, what's really cool about this guy, I got the wrong remote, but what's really cool is that on the remote you have controls to increase bass and treble. I just found that for late night listening sessions, having the ability to just increase the bass like that and even lower the treble was so cool to do. And so I'll talk about a couple of records that I listened to on this guy that I really did find a lot of enjoyment out of. And it's really because of that ability, I think, to EQ this guy that I was able to have this really fun listening experience. So this is a collaboration between two rappers, Planet Asia and Rasco. I want to say this album came out in like mid-2000s or so. I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember. Now, years ago, back in the 90s and the early 2000s, there was a show in New York City, or a radio show in New York City, called The Wake Up Show by Sway and King Tech. And one of the things they used to do on that show is they used to invite rappers onto there and freestyle. And so that's how I discovered these two guys, Planet Asia and Rasco, but they're from an era when rappers were, freestyling for real and they weren't doing any writtens. This is an incredible kind of old school hip hop album that I think if you're somebody that loves just lyricism and poetry, this is a really great album. Another artist that I listened to on this album is Sage Francis. This is, one of his first albums called A Healthy Distrust. And again, this is another album that I've listened to for years now. And, Sage Francis is noteworthy because he's one of the first white rappers, I think, that I discovered at least. And he's kind of that movement of underground, or rather they were called backpack rappers. I mean, the guy has got some of the most complex lyrical rhymes and complex poetry that you're ever going to find. It's like Sage Francis is one of these guys you can listen to his album like 100 times and you're still going to continue to hear new things. Another artist here is Master Ace, and this is a really cool, noteworthy album because this guy recorded all these tracks over MF Doom instrumentals. Now, the instrumentals are from this album, which is MF Doom Special Herbs, or rather, this is his entire, I think it's his entire instrumental collection, or all the beats that he used on his albums. So yeah, this is just a really cool album, and it's got that really old school gritty hip hop feel to it that I think, sometimes I think better suits a warmer piece of equipment, or possibly something like this. Here's another Sage Francis album that I think is a little bit darker than Healthy Distrust. There's some really dark themes on here, and I would almost categorize this album as more of a horrorcore rap. That's sort of a subgenre of hip hop that kind of has a little bit more of a punk rock, I think, attitude to it. This has also been one of my favorite albums of the last couple of years. I want to say this guy came out in 2022. This album is Danger Mouse and Black Thought. Black Thought is a rapper from The Roots, and you might know him from the Jimmy Fallon show or whatever. But, Black Thought is one of these rappers that I really think is one of the most underrated rappers ever. And he's been at this game now for probably over 20 years. And when you listen to him on this album, this is like coming from a rapper now that is just fully matured into his 50s. He has a sense of wisdom. And there's so many things that he talks about on this album that are incredibly relevant to what's happening in the world today. And it's just a reminder, I think, of like how incredible this genre is for, I think, discussing the problems of the world today. So if you haven't heard this album and you like hip hop, I definitely think you should listen to this album. And also, like, if you don't like hip hop or you've never heard hip hop, I think this is an album that you should give it a shot. I think you'll be really surprised here. And this doesn't have terrible production. I mean, this has really good production on it. So maybe it's not the best example of what I'm trying to explain here, but it is an album that I listened to on this guy. Now, the last album I'll talk about is from an artist called The Clipping. Now, this stuff is really, really interesting because it is hip hop. At times, it's almost spoken poetry. There's incredible spatial things happening on this album, and there's a lot of electronic influence. There's some music concrete, or rather like there's some elements in here that remind me of found sound or post-industrial music, the kinds of things that like John Cage was playing about in like the early 20s. There's some really cool stuff on here, and it does have a dark kind of over theme to it. The album is called, I forgot, but yeah, the album is called Visions of Bodies Being Burned. So yeah, that for me is, I think, where I found a lot of enjoyment out of this guy. And I think being able to play with the EQ settings by increasing the bass or even decreasing the treble on this guy allowed me to get a lot of enjoyment out of these hip hop albums. I think, normally, at least in my system with Kef LS50s, I'm not getting an incredible amount of bass. And if you've ever been to a hip hop show before, you know how much bass they can have, right? And so sometimes I think, I love hip hop, but I do sometimes, I think, dream about having big speakers and big subwoofers for those times that I just want to like completely rock out to this type of music. And so I think this is just kind of one of these examples in life, or maybe in this hobby, where possibly hi-fi isn't everything. And it's not always going to be the greatest use case for your situation. Talking about the headphone amp on this guy, I wasn't the most impressed with this headphone amp. I'll be honest with you. I think in a similar fashion, I think that there is this kind of closed off sound to this guy that I can't quite explain. There is a sense of restrainment. Like I want things to bleed out a little bit more or carry through space a little bit more. And I'm feeling like this thing has this sense of roll off that happens much quicker than I would like. My last value proposition for this guy. I think if you're a gamer or you're somebody that wants to upgrade the sound of, say, your PlayStation 5 or even your gaming console, whatever that may be, in my testing purposes, I played computer games through this guy. Now I have a desktop that's in another room in my place, and I have fed an HDMI cable all the way out to here. Now it's a 50-foot optical HDMI cable, so there's no degradation of signal. And from there, I'm getting audio fed through the HDMI cable through the TV. Then I'm feeding the TV signal out of there into my Blue Sound and into here via USB. I should state that you don't need to have a blue sound to run this setup. You could just run your gaming console into your TV or your computer or whatever, and you could just run optical out from your TV into this guy. That would also work. And I found that, at least for gaming purposes, I found this guy to probably shine more so than it did for music. I think that playing games like The Last of Us is a game that I've been playing recently. You know, it's a game that has a lot of things going on in the game and enemies coming from here or there. It's a game where listening to what's going on in the game is incredibly important because it's a spatial awareness thing. You need to be able to know when danger's coming from left, right, etc. And you can certainly play a game like that on a TV with 2-channel, but it's arguably better on headphones because of that immersion and spatial awareness that you get with headphones. And so playing a game like Last of Us 2, which is a zombie game, you know, I just had a lot of enjoyment out of this guy. I think it works great for a gaming setup or somebody that, even just needs a headphone DAC all in one kind of device for, say, your desktop. I did not use this guy on my desktop computer at my desk. So the last thing I'll talk about in this guy is its tube. The tube that it comes with is a 6N3 tube, and I believe it can accept a couple other tubes as well, but don't quote me on that. But I didn't play around with testing out the tube on this guy. I think for $89 at this price point, it's so cheap that probably if you're gonna start off here, you might not be thinking about swapping tubes, although maybe you are because it is so cheap. I will let you know that when I compared this to the Fosi Audio GR70 that I just reviewed, there's really no competition here. And I think that what the GR70 is doing for its price point is leagues ahead of what I'm getting out of this guy. You're not going to get a solid tube-like experience out of this, but you know, this tube is more or less a buffer, and I think that you're going to get a great deal of solid state sound out of this. This brings me to my final conclusions of this guy. And who is this guy for? And should you pick one up? I really think that this is just another starter device that could be really good for a very minimal system. You could buy this guy and you could get a turntable, and then all you need is to get a power amp, or probably better, and probably what would fit this better, is a pair of powered bookshelf speakers, because then you don't need to go out and buy power amps. You can go out and get something like the Edifier power bookshelf speakers, or you could even get something like the Cantu YU2 or YU4s, and yeah, you could go out and get those, and then you could pick this up, and then you're kind of ready to run. And then I think slowly over time, you could possibly look at upgrading and getting a better source component. I think if you like this review, please hit that like button down below, hit the bell notification, and there's some choices there that you can select from. And then, yeah, please leave a comment. Let me know. I mean, have you guys tried this? I think one of the things I'm really curious to know is what swapping tubes in this guy will do and whether or not that's worth it. So if anybody else out there in the world has done that with this, I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on that. And yeah, guys, I mean, I don't know what else to say. I mean, $89 and gets you like 3 devices in one. So bye-bye, guys. Take care. Have a good day. Even Fadi's, my